One day my school teacher came to my house. Something happened I still can't bring myself to talk about. Read. A gay love story. He was 28 years old. I was 18 in my final year of school. He was my literature teacher. And I was the student who sat in the third row and understood every poem he taught, except the one that was happening to me in real time. The day he came to my house, I opened the door and saw him standing there, in the afternoon rain, holding my notebook, the one I had left in his classroom, the one with the poem I had written in the back, the poem that was about him. He looked at me, and I knew from the way he looked that he had read it. My name is Kabir. I'm going to tell you this story the way it actually happened, not the cleaned up version, not the version where everything is simple and clear and makes immediate sense. The real version, which was complicated and slow and happened mostly in the space between words rather than in the words themselves, and which I have been carrying quietly for 2 years without saying it to anyone, and which I am going to say now because carrying things alone is something I have done for long enough. I was 18 years old when this story begins. Final year of secondary school, the year that everyone around you insists is the most important year of your life, which is a thing adults say to 18-year-olds that is both true and deeply unhelpful. I was a good student, not effortlessly, not the kind of good student who finds things easy and wears the ease lightly, but the working kind, the kind who reads things twice and takes notes in the margins and stays up too late with textbooks. Literature was the subject I loved most and also found most difficult, which is the relationship I have always had with the things that matter most to me. They cost more than other things because they mean more. He joined the school in September of that year. Mr. Asan Raza, 28 years old, which I know because someone asked him on the first day and he told us, with the easy confidence of a person who is not troubled by being known. He had studied English literature at university and then done a teaching qualification and then spent 2 years at a school in another city before coming here. He was tall, genuinely tall, the kind of tall that you notice when someone enters a room before you have registered anything else about them. Dark-haired, lean, with the kind of face that is interesting rather than simply good-looking, defined jaw, dark eyes that were attentive in a way you noticed, the particular quality of a person who listened with their full attention rather than with the performance of attention. He wore good clothes without making them look like a statement. He had opinions about poetry that he expressed with the conviction of someone who had arrived at them through genuine thinking rather than inherited from someone else. He wrote on the board in a handwriting that was clear and slightly stylized, the handwriting of a person who has thought about handwriting as a thing worth thinking about. I sat in the third row, left side. This was my seat, not assigned, just the seat I had taken on the first day of the year and which had become, in the way things become yours without a formal agreement, my specific square of this classroom. From the third row, left side, I had a clear line of sight to the board and to the desk at the front and to the space where he stood when he taught, which was rarely behind the desk. He moved when he taught, back and forth at the front of the room, the movement of someone whose thinking was physical, who needed to pace through an idea. I noticed this on the first day. I noticed a great many things on the first day that I then spent several weeks telling myself were simply the observations of an attentive student about a new teacher. Attentive students notice things about teachers. This is normal, this is fine. I kept telling myself this for approximately 6 weeks with decreasing conviction, until I stopped telling myself anything and simply sat in the third row and let what was happening happen, without examining it too closely, because examining it closely felt like standing at the edge of something that had no railing. The way he taught literature was different from any teacher I had had before, and I had had good teachers. I want to be clear about this because what I am about to describe is not the contrast of someone exceptional against a background of mediocrity. I had been well taught. He was something else. He taught as if the poems and the stories were alive. Not metaphorically alive, he treated them with the respect and attention you give to living things. When he read a poem aloud in class, he read it the way poems are supposed to be read, slowly, with the weight of each word acknowledged, with the pauses that the poem asked for rather than the pauses that punctuation suggested. He made us sit with lines that were difficult rather than rushing past them to the analysis. He said once in the first month, "Understanding comes after the feeling, not before it. If you feel nothing, you have not yet read the poem, you have only processed its surface." I wrote this down. I still have it in a notebook on my shelf. He asked questions that had no single right answer. This was, for a class of final year students trained to find the correct response and produce it efficiently, initially disorienting and then, for some of us, liberating. He would ask something about a poem, not what does this metaphor mean, but what does this poem want from you? What is it asking you to do or feel or understand? And the quality of the silence that followed was different from the silence that follows an answerable question. It was a thinking silence, a genuine one. He called on me often in these discussions. Not exclusively, he moved around the class, he was fair about it, he did not play favorites in any obvious way. But he called on me often enough that I noticed it, and in the way that I noticed things I was trying not to examine too closely, I noticed the quality of his attention when I answered. He listened to my answers differently than he listened to other answers. Or perhaps I only thought he did, because I was listening to the listening with more care than the situation warranted. I am not certain even now which one was true. What I am certain of, I worked harder in his class than in any other. I read the poems more times than I needed to. I wrote the essays at greater length than was required and then cut them back to the required length and felt the cutting as a loss. I thought about the things he said in class later in my room in the evenings, which is what happens when a teacher is good. The thinking continues after the bell. He was the reason I worked hard. I told myself it was because the subject mattered, which was true. I told myself it was because the teaching was excellent, which was also true. I did not tell myself the third thing, which was also true and which I was not ready for. I kept a separate notebook for his class. Not the standard exercise book, a proper notebook, the kind with a good cover and cream paper, the kind you buy when a subject deserves more than a school exercise book. I took notes in the front sections, the poems, the discussions, the things he said that I wanted to keep. The notes in the front were careful and organized and looked like what they were, a good student's record of good teaching. The back section was different. I wrote in the back section things that were not notes, things that were not about the poems we were studying or not directly, things that were their own kind of poem or attempt at poem, the unsettled thoughts that I could not say out loud or process anywhere else that needed to go somewhere, and the back section of the notebook was where they went. I wrote about things I was feeling that I did not have language for. I wrote about the specific quality of attention, how it felt to be the person in the room who was listening most carefully, about what you saw from that position and how it changed you. I wrote, in the careful circling way of someone who is approaching something true but is not ready to name it, about what it felt like to look forward to something so specifically that the days in between it had a different quality. I was writing about his class, I was writing about him. I did not in the early notebooks name this directly, but as October became November and November became a habit and the habit became something I could not imagine the week without, the writing in the back section became more honest, less careful, more direct in the way that private writing becomes direct when you have stopped performing even for yourself. In November, I wrote a poem. A real one, not the circling approach from a distance kind, but a direct one. About a classroom and a third row and the specific quality of a particular kind of attention. About what it felt like to understand something about yourself that you had no framework for, no language for, no place in your life where it fit. About looking at someone and knowing, without wanting to know, that what you were looking at was the most real thing in the room. I wrote it in the back section of the notebook and I read it once and then I did not read it again, the way you sometimes write things not to return to them but simply to have put them somewhere outside yourself. I left the notebook in the classroom on a Thursday afternoon in December. I did not realize until I was home. Friday afternoon, the last period was over and I was in my room doing homework, or attempting to do homework, which I was doing with approximately 40% of my attention, because the other 60% was occupied by the realization that I had left the notebook in the classroom. I had gone back Thursday evening after school and the classroom had been locked. I would get it Monday. This was fine, the notebook was just a notebook, Monday was 3 days away. I told myself this. I was still telling myself this when, at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, there was a knock at the front door of our house. My parents were both out, my father at work, my mother visiting my aunt across the city, a regular Friday arrangement. I was alone in the house. I went to the door. I opened it. Mr. Asen Raza was standing on our front step. The afternoon had turned gray and slightly rainy, one of those December Fridays when the light fails early and the cold is damp rather than sharp. He was wearing a dark coat, collar up against the rain, and he was holding my notebook. The cream-covered notebook with the good paper. My notebook, which had been left in his classroom, which he had found, which he had brought here. Which he had, in the hours between Thursday afternoon and Friday at 4:30, presumably opened, to find my name on the inside cover, which was how he knew where to bring it, to find what else. He looked at me. I looked at him. For one complete and suspended moment on the front step of my house in the December rain with my notebook between us, we simply looked at each other. He said, "Kabir," quietly. My name in his voice had a quality I had not heard before, not the classroom voice, not the teaching voice, something else underneath. I said because I needed to say something and nothing adequate was available. You found it. It was on the floor by the third row desks, he said. I saw your name inside. I nodded. I was very still. I was calculating with a frantic interior speed that had nothing to do with my outward stillness what he had seen. He had seen my name, he had brought it here. He could have simply kept it until Monday. He had come to my house on a Friday afternoon in the rain. Would you like to come in? I said. The words came from some automatic, social, well-raised part of me that was operating independently of the rest of me, which was doing something more complicated. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Yes, thank you." He came in. Our house is not large, but it is comfortable. The living room off the front hall, the kitchen at the back, my parents' room, and my room upstairs. It had the particular quiet of a house where the usual people were absent, where the sounds of it, the heating, the clock in the hall, the rain against the front window were more noticeable than usual. I took his coat at the door. My mother raised me to take coats at the door. It is an automatic gesture, and he gave it to me with the particular quality of a person who is being careful about something, who is paying close attention to themselves and to the situation. I hung it on the hook in the hall. I turned around. He was standing in the hallway with my notebook still in his hand, looking at me. "I'll make tea," I said, because I needed to do something with my hands because the kitchen was in a direction and going in a direction seemed important, because tea was what you made when something needed to happen slowly enough to be navigable. "Thank you," he said. He followed me to the kitchen. He sat at the kitchen table, the chair on the left side, the one nearest the window where the rain was visible coming down in the darkening afternoon. He put the notebook on the table in front of him and folded his hands and looked at them. I filled the kettle. I got the mugs, the good ones, from the cupboard because some automatic part of me was still performing hospitality. I put tea bags in. I watched the kettle. He said from the table, "Kabir." "Yes," I said, not turning around. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and you can tell me it's none of my business." That would be a completely reasonable answer. I turned around. He was looking at me from the kitchen table with my notebook in front of him, with the rain on the window behind him, with the specific expression of a person who is being very careful and very honest at the same time, which is a difficult combination. "Okay," I said. He put his hand on the notebook, not opening it, just resting his hand on it. "The back section," he said. The kettle was very loud, the rain was very loud, everything was very loud. "I didn't read it intentionally," he said. "I opened it to find a name." The notebook fell open toward the back and I saw enough. I closed it immediately. He looked at me directly, but I saw enough. I stood at the kitchen counter with my hands at my sides and looked at him and I felt the specific quality of a thing that has been private becoming no longer private. The specific vertigo of that, not painful exactly, but enormous. The enormous feeling of being seen in something you have only ever seen alone. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable," he said. "I want to say that first and clearly. I am not here to." "This is not." He stopped, started again. "I came because I wanted to return the notebook and because I wanted to make sure you were okay. That is the whole reason I came." I said, "Did you read the poem?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "part of it," before I realized I should stop. The kettle clicked off. I didn't move. "Kabir," he said, his voice was very quiet, "how long have you been carrying that?" And something in me, something that had been tightly held for a long time, tightly enough that the holding had become ordinary, had become just the background condition of being me, something gave way. Not dramatically, not with drama or tears or the performed version of someone breaking, just a quiet release. The quiet release of a thing that has been held in secret for long enough that the secret has gotten too heavy to hold standing up. I sat down at the kitchen table across from him and I said, "Since September." He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not redirect. He did not say before I had finished any of the things I had been afraid of for months, afraid of in the abstract, afraid of in the specific way of someone who has a feeling they cannot name to anyone and therefore cannot know how it will be received. He simply listened with the same quality of attention he brought to the classroom, the full kind, the kind that receives what is actually being said rather than the surface of it. I told him things I had not said to anyone. I told him about the September of this year, the way the year had started and the way his arrival had changed it, the quality of learning in his class that was different from other learning, the way the poems we studied had seemed to be speaking to something in me that I had not known needed speaking to. I told him about the notebook, the front section and the back section and the difference between them, and what the back section had become over the months. I did not tell him in so many words about him specifically, but I had said since September, and he was the thing that had changed in September, and we were both in the room and neither of us was pretending that the other was not. I also told him because it seemed necessary, because he was a teacher and I was his student and this fact sat in the room between us like furniture, that I understood the impossibility of it, that I had never had any intention of saying it, that the notebook was the place where the thing lived precisely because it was private, because things that cannot exist in the world still need to exist somewhere, and the back section of a notebook was the somewhere I had found. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet, the rain had eased slightly, the tea was cold in the mugs, neither of us had touched it. He looked at the table for a moment, then he looked at me. He said, "Thank you for telling me." I said, "You already knew, partly." "I knew something," he said, "I didn't know the whole of it, there is a difference." He paused. There is always a difference between knowing something and being trusted with the whole of it. I looked at him, at the face I had been looking at from the third row since September. Up close, in the kitchen of my house in the gray afternoon without the classroom between us, it was different, not more or less than what I had seen from the third row, just different, more available, more present, more real. He said carefully, "Can I say something, something that I want you to hear in the spirit it is intended?" "Yes," I said. "Said, what you wrote, what I saw of what you wrote, it was good. The poem, it was genuinely, seriously good." He held my gaze. "I am not saying this to manage the situation or to redirect it or to make you feel better about something embarrassing. I am saying it because it is true and because I think you should know it is true." He paused. "You have been sitting in my class since September writing things that are the real thing, not student exercises, the real thing. I wanted you to know that." I did not know what to do with this. My face did something that I could not control and did not try to. "You're going to be a writer," he said, "or you already are one. The becoming is not the thing that makes it true." The rain on the window, the cold tea, the notebook on the table between us. "Austin," I said. And then I stopped, because I had used his name, his first name, which I had never said aloud before, which had been just a thing in my head, and the using of it had done something to the air in the room. He looked at me when I said his name. Something moved in his expression, something that was being very carefully held. "You should call me Mr. Raza," he said, very quietly. And the quiet of it was not a coldness, it was the opposite of coldness. It was the specific quality of a boundary stated by someone who is holding it with effort rather than ease. "I know," I said, "I know that." "Kabir." "I know," I said again, "I'm 18, you're my teacher, I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I told you the thing because you asked and because you already knew part of it and because," I stopped, breathed, "because I have been carrying it for 4 months completely alone and it has gotten very heavy. That is the whole reason. I am not asking for anything." He looked at me across the kitchen table, in the December afternoon, in my empty house. "I know you're not," he said. "I know," he paused. "I also want to be honest with you because I think honesty is what you actually deserve and I think you can handle honesty better than management." He looked at the table briefly, then back up. "I am going to stay on the right side of every line that exists here. There is not a version of this in which I don't do that, you understand that?" "Yes," I said. "But I also want to say," he stopped. The careful quality of someone choosing exactly the right words, the quality I knew from his teaching, the way he used language with deliberate care. "I want to say that I see you, in the class and in this room today, I see you very clearly, and what I see is remarkable, not the feeling you described, not the poem, you the person." He looked at me directly. "That is not a small thing to say, I mean it as the honest thing it is." The room held this. I was 18 years old in my kitchen on a Friday afternoon in December with the rain at the window and my literature teacher sitting across from me, and the most private thing I had ever written sitting in a notebook between us, and I felt known. For the first time in a very long time. The specific, overwhelming, terrifying feeling of being known by someone and not having them move away from what they saw. He stayed for an hour. We drank the cold tea and I made fresh tea and we talked, not about the notebook again, not about what had been said in the first part of the afternoon. About other things, books, the course, what I wanted to do after the year finished, what I was thinking about for university. He talked about his own university years, the books that had changed things for him, the teachers who had mattered. He talked about writings, not the poem, not my writing specifically, but about what writing was for, what it did, why people did it even when no one was going to read it. We talked the way people talk when they have got through something difficult and arrived on the other side of it, and the other side is surprisingly comfortable. The conversation was easy. I recognized the ease of it because I had felt it from the third row, the ease of his company, the ease of being in a room where someone is thinking genuinely and sharing the thinking genuinely. But up close in my kitchen, it was more than the third row. Up close it was the best conversation I had had with anyone in a long time, possibly ever. The honest and equal kind where neither person is performing and both people are genuinely present. At some point my phone screen lit up on the counter, my mother texting to say she would be home by 6. I saw the time, it was past 5, he saw me look at the time. He said I should go. My parents will be home soon, I said, both true and a kind of answer. He stood up from the kitchen table. He picked up the notebook and looked at it for a moment and then set it on the table in front of me. Keep writing in the back section, he said. I looked up at him. Whatever you put there, he said, keep doing it, just keep doing it. He paused. A year from now or 5 years from now or 10, you will want to have kept doing it. I nodded. He went to the hall and I got his coat from the hook and gave it to him and he put it on. At the front door, he turned. Kabir, he said. Yes, I said. Monday, he said, in class things are exactly as they have always been. I know, I said. That is not a small thing, he said. I want you to know that I understand it is not a small thing. The line I am holding it because it is right and because you deserve for it to be held. Not because, he stopped. The careful quality, the choosing of words, not because anything I said today was untrue. I stood in my front doorway in the December evening and looked at him on the step and I said, I know. He nodded. He turned and walked down the path and the gate closed behind him and the rain had mostly stopped and the street was dark and wet and ordinary and he was gone. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long time. Then I picked up the notebook from the kitchen table and went upstairs to my room and sat on my bed. I opened the notebook to the back section. I began to write. Monday in class was exactly as he had said it would be. He taught. I sat in the third row. The class discussed a poem by Keats, Ode to a Nightingale, which I had read before but which felt, on this particular Monday morning in December, as if it were about something I now understood in a way I had not before. He called on me twice. His voice when he called on me was exactly the same as it had always been, clear, warm, professionally attentive. Nothing in it that named Friday afternoon. Nothing that could be read by anyone else in the room. I answered with my full attention. We agreed on the poem. We disagreed briefly on what the final stanza was doing. I said it was resolution, he said it was resignation, and the disagreement was conducted with the courtesy of two people who respect each other's readings and enjoy the friction of genuine difference. The class moved on. After the bell, as people were gathering bags and talking and filing out, he said to no one specifically, to the general air of the departing class, good discussion today. And then, barely perceptible to me specifically, the smallest adjustment of eye contact, a fraction of a second. Good point on the final stanza, Kabir. I said I still think I'm right. He said you might be, the shadow of something, nothing anyone else would catch. And that was it. Monday and the weeks that followed were exactly as he had said they would be. The line held. The classroom was the classroom. He was Mr. Raza and I was his student, and the poetry was the poetry and the discussion was the discussion, and the distance between the teacher's front and the third row on the left was exactly the distance it had always been. But the thing had been said, and said things do not unsay themselves. What changed was inside rather than outside. I worked differently, not harder exactly, because I had already been working very hard, but with a different quality, with more honesty maybe, with less of the performance of student, who is doing well, and more of the actual engagement of someone who is genuinely inside the subject. I wrote essays that were more willing to be wrong, which is the same as being more willing to be honest. Which is the same as being better. He marked them and returned them with marginal notes that were specific and engaged in the way that marginal notes are when the person writing them is genuinely responding to what they read. The back section of the notebook continued. I kept writing in it as he had said. Poetry and not quite poetry, and the thinking in writing that I had discovered was the way I process things, not before I understood them, not as a record of understanding, but in the process of understanding, the writing itself, the method of arriving at what I thought. December ended, the Christmas break came, 2 weeks without the classroom, without the third row, without the particular rhythm of Tuesdays and Thursdays. I wrote in the notebook. I thought about the Friday afternoon and the kitchen and the things that had been said, and I turned them over in my mind the way you turn over something you are trying to understand completely. and each time I turned them over I found I understood them slightly differently, from a slightly different angle, and each angle was true. January, February, the year continuing, exams approaching. What I was learning in those months between December and the end of the school year was not only literature. Literature was the subject. But the subject in his class was also always the thing underneath the subject, the question of what it meant to be a person who felt things and what you did with the feeling things, and how the feeling things could be turned into something that existed in the world rather than only inside you. He did not say this directly. He would not have said it directly, but it was in everything he taught, in the poems he chose and the questions he asked, and the particular way he treated the difficulty of a poem as something to sit with rather than solve. The poems we studied were about love, loss, time, the gap between what you feel and what you can say, the specific courage of saying the unsayable, the way words fail and the way words failing still sometimes get closer to the truth than anything else. I understood all of this more in my body than in my head, which is the way you understand things that are also happening to you. I understood that I was gay. I had been circling this understanding for years, since before September, since before Asen, since before the notebook's back section. But this year, this classroom, this specific education in what feelings were and what you did with them, this had brought me to the point where the understanding was no longer something I was approaching. It was something I had arrived at. I was gay. This was true. It was the first most true thing about me, or one of the first, one of the things that was part of the infrastructure rather than the surface. I told my best friend Daniel in February. We had been friends since we were 12 and he was the person I trusted most in the world outside my family, and telling him felt necessary and terrifying in roughly equal parts. We were walking home from school on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky pale and cold, and I said, "I need to tell you something," and he said, "Okay," and I said it, and he walked beside me in silence for a moment and then said, "Okay, are you okay?" I said, "Yes, I think so, getting more okay." He said, "Good, thank you for telling me." And we walked home and talked about other things, and nothing between us changed because it had never needed to change. The thing I had told him was something that was true about me, not something new that I had become. I did not tell him about the Friday afternoon. Some things belong to the notebook only or not yet. In March, 2 months before the end of the school year, there was a parents' evening. Parents' evenings involve the teachers staying late and the parents coming in and having brief formal conversations about progress and predicted grades and areas for development. My mother came, my father was working, the usual arrangement for these evenings. I came with her because the school asked the students to attend, to sit in on the conversations about themselves. My mother and Mr. Raza spoke for 10 minutes at the table in the corner of the main hall. He was professional and warm and specific about my work, the essay on Keats, the recent paper on narrative voice, the predicted grade which was high and which he described as earned rather than given, which my mother appreciated. He spoke to me briefly and directly while my mother listened, about the final term, about the last essays, about what I needed to focus on. After my mother had moved on to the next table, he looked at me for a moment. Just a moment, while the hall buzzed around us with other conversations. He said quietly, "How are you?" I said, "Good, really good actually." He held my gaze for a moment with the directness that was one of the things about him that I had, over these months, stopped trying not to notice. "I'm glad," he said. And that was it. My mother was ready to go and I followed her and we walked home through the March evening, and she talked about how nice my literature teacher seemed and how clearly he understood what I was capable of, and I walked beside her and listened and said the right things. The final week of term, the last week of school, the last week of being a student in his class. There is a specific quality to last things when you know they are last things. They become more present, more themselves, more detailed, more deserving of attention. I sat in the third row on the last Tuesday and the last Thursday, and I paid attention with everything I had. Not to him specifically, to all of it. The classroom, the poems, the quality of the discussion, the particular thing he did when he was explaining something that mattered to him, the way the light came through the windows in the morning, all of it. The whole thing held carefully. The last class ended. Everyone said goodbye with the noise and energy of end of term, the specific relief of final year students for whom the hardest year was over. He said general goodbyes to the class, warm and genuine. People filed out. I was last to leave, not deliberately, or perhaps deliberately, I am still not sure. I packed my bag slowly and stood up and turned toward the door. He said, "Kabir." I turned around. He was at his desk now, not standing at the front. The classroom empty around him, the boards still with the last poem on them. He said, "University next year." "Yes," I said. "English literature." "Yes," I said, "I think so." He nodded, he looked at the desk for a moment, then at me. "Keep writing," he said, "in the front section and the back section." I understood what he was saying, all of it. The front section, the public, the studied, the craft that would develop in the years ahead. The back section, the private, the honest, the personal, the place where the real understanding lived and where the real writing came from. "I will," I said. He held my gaze for a moment. What was in his face was, "I have thought about this many times, trying to find the right word for it. Not sadness exactly, not regret, something quieter than either of those. Something that acknowledged this classroom, these months, this specific arrangement of two people and their specific situation is ending now. Not what happened in December. What happened in December was never a thing that was going to continue. But this, the class, the discussion, the Tuesday and Thursday rhythm, the particular quality of learning that only happens when you are completely inside a subject and the person guiding you through it is exactly right for you. This was ending. "Thank you," I said, "for this year, for the way you taught." He said, "Thank you for being the kind of student who made teaching worth the trouble." I smiled, he almost smiled back. I walked out of the classroom. I did not look back because looking back felt like the wrong kind of thing, the sentimental kind rather than the forward-looking kind. But in the hallway, I stopped for one moment and I stood there and I let the year be exactly what it had been in full without reducing it. Then I went home. A year passed. I finished school. The exams happened and the grades came and they were what he had predicted, and I was, when I saw them, genuinely proud in the way that you are proud when you have worked for something and the work is proven to have been real. University, I deferred for a year. I wanted time before time to write, time to be in the world, time to understand some things that school had begun the process of understanding and which needed more space than a school year had given them. I told my parents I was gay. This was the hardest telling and also the most important, harder than telling Daniel, harder even than the kitchen conversation. Because my parents are my parents and what they think of me is something I have cared about deeply for my entire life. My mother cried, which I had expected, and then held me, which I had also expected but which was more overwhelming than expected. My father was quiet for a long time and then said things that were careful and considered and ultimately good. It took time. It took several months of conversations and adjustments and the particular work of a family reorganizing its understanding of one of its members. But it took, in the end, we came through it. I kept writing, in notebooks with cream paper, front section and back section. The back sections filling up faster than the front sections, which I think Austin would have found satisfying to know. I thought about him. Not in the way I had thought about him at 18, that particular quality of feeling with its intensity and its private weight had changed as I had changed, had settled into something quieter and more retrospective. I thought about what that year had been, about the classroom and the poetry and the Friday afternoon in December and what all of it had given me. Not just the obvious things, the grades, the literary education, the push toward becoming a writer. The less obvious things, the understanding of what it felt like to be seen, the discovery that carrying something alone was a choice rather than a necessity. The proof that saying the true thing, even when terrifying, was survivable, was better than the alternative. These were the things the year had given me, not from one person alone, from the whole year, the class, the poems, the work, the particular education in paying attention. But his presence had been the center of it, and I was honest enough to acknowledge that. In August of the year after school, I wrote him a letter. Not to send, I want to be clear about this. Not a letter I intended to deliver. A letter for the back section of the notebook, which is to say, a letter for the true things that needed to exist somewhere without necessarily being said. I wrote, "I am writing this because it is almost exactly 1 year since the Friday afternoon in December, which I remember with more clarity and completeness than almost any other single event of my 18 years. I am writing it because I understand it differently now than I did then, and I want to record the understanding. What happened in my kitchen that afternoon was, you saw me, not the student version, not the third row version, the real one which I had been keeping in the back section of a notebook because it had nowhere else to go. And you received what you saw with honesty and care and the particular kind of respect that is rarer than it sounds, the kind that takes what you are shown seriously, that doesn't diminish it or manage it or make it into something more comfortable. You told me it was real. You told me I was real. And then you held every line that needed holding with care and without apology, and you did this in a way that made me understand that being the person who holds the line properly is not less than being the person who crosses it. It is more. It requires more. I am gay. I have said this to several people now, I said it to my parents, and the saying of it was the hardest and most important thing I have done. None of the other sayings would have been possible without the practice run of the Friday afternoon, the learning that truth, when it meets someone honest enough to receive it with care, does not destroy the room, it opens it. I am going to be a writer. You told me this before I fully believed it myself, and you told it to me as a fact rather than an encouragement, which made all the difference. Facts can be worked toward, encouragements can be doubted. I have been working toward it since September of last year, and I intend to continue. Thank you for coming to my house in the rain with my notebook. Thank you for sitting in my kitchen and listening and being honest. Thank you for the line that you held, which was the right thing and which I understand now more fully than I understood it then. Thank you for the class and the poems and the quality of attention you brought to both. I hope that wherever you are teaching, there is a student in the third row on the left who is writing things in the back section of a notebook that will matter. I hope you find them the way you found me. I hope you do for them what you did for me, which was, tell them the truth. Kabir. I closed the notebook, I put it on the shelf. I went to bed and lay in the dark and felt the specific quality of a thing properly completed. A thing said, even in private, put down. University, English literature as decided. A new city, a new set of rooms, new people. The first weeks of it had the same particular anxiety as every new beginning, the sense of being unknown, of being the unwritten version of yourself, of having to build from the beginning. I had learned from the year between that this feeling was temporary, that it resolved. That building from the beginning was something I was, it turned out, reasonably good at. I found in the first month a professor whose class had the same quality as Austin's class, the quality of genuine thinking, of poems treated as living things, of questions that had no single right answer. She was 40-something and had written 3 books and had strong opinions about contemporary poetry and absolutely no interest in whether her opinions were popular. I sat in the front row of her class, which was new for me, and worked the way I had learned to work. I made friends, slowly and carefully, and with the particular seriousness I brought to things that mattered. One of them, a second-year student named Riz, who was studying philosophy and had opinions about everything, and listened to disagreement with genuine interest rather than defensiveness, became, over the course of the first term, the person I talked to most and most honestly. I told Riz I was gay in October, early in our friendship, because I had learned that telling early was better, that carrying it as a secret even for a short time was a weight I no longer wanted to choose to carry. He said, "Yeah, I thought so. Is that okay to say?" I said yes. He said, "Good, me too, by the way." I said, "I thought so too." We both laughed. It was the beginning of a friendship that had honesty in it from the first, which is the best kind of beginning. I kept writing. The notebooks continued to fill front and back sections both, in the pattern that had been established in that final year of school. The writing was getting better, slowly and with effort, and with the specific improvement that comes when you have been doing something consistently for long enough that the doing of it becomes more natural, and the quality of the doing has room to develop. November of my second term at university, I published a poem in the university literary magazine. Not a long poem, 10 lines in the careful spare style I had been developing. It was about a classroom and a third row, and the way certain kinds of attention change you, not the attention of one person specifically, but the kind of attention that sees you, that takes what you are seriously, that creates the space for you to become more fully what you are. The editor of the magazine, who had read it twice, said, "This is about a teacher, isn't it?" I said, "It is about a kind of teaching." She said, "That's a very careful answer." "I have had a good teacher," I said. "I learned careful answers from him." She smiled. "Is that what you learned?" I thought about a December Friday and a front doorstep and the rain and my notebook and a kitchen and an hour of the most honest conversation I had had in 18 years and the specific, careful, costly grace of a line held properly. I thought about what I had learned from that, all of it, the full list. "No," I said, "that is the smallest thing I learned. This is the story I still cannot fully bring myself to talk about. Not because it was painful, but pain that teaches you something is a different kind of pain from pain that simply hurts. Not because anything happened that was wrong, nothing happened that was wrong. The lines that needed holding were held with care by someone who understood why they needed holding. I cannot fully bring myself to talk about it because it is the most true thing that happened to me in my 18 years, and true things have a privacy to them even after they have been written down. They belong to the person who lived them in a way that other things don't. You can tell the story of something that happened to you. You cannot fully give away the way it felt from the inside. What I know now that I did not know at 18. Being seen, properly, completely, in the private thing as well as the public thing, is one of the most significant experiences a person can have. Not being seen by the right person, or being seen at the right moment, or being seen by someone who loves you. Just being seen. The experience of being known in your full reality, including the parts you have been carrying in the back section, and having that knowing received with honesty and care. This changes you, not once in one dramatic moment, but over time, gradually, in every relationship, in every room, and every conversation that comes after it. You know now that it is possible. And knowing it is possible makes you more willing to make it possible again. The thing I felt at 18, I have thought about how to describe this accurately without making it more or less than it was. It was real. It was the specific reality of a feeling that arrived in me without my consent and lived in me without my permission, and which I could neither fully understand nor fully resolve. It was, in retrospect, the first version of something I am still learning to understand, the specific way I love, which is completely and with my whole attention and at great depth, which is also the way I read and the way I write and the way I listen, because these things are not separate from each other in me. They are all the same thing expressed in different directions. That year in that class, reading those poems with that particular quality of teaching, I learned what I was. Not only that I was gay, though that too, but what kind of person I was, what my attention was like and what my feeling was like and what my writing was and what I needed from the people in my life. This is a remarkable thing to learn at 18. Most people take much longer. I was given by the accident of a good teacher arriving in the right year and a notebook left in a classroom and a Friday afternoon in December and an hour of honest conversation in a kitchen, a head start. I am grateful for it, all of it, every difficult part of it. The poem in the back section of the notebook, the one he read part of, the one that started everything, the one about the classroom in the third row and the quality of a particular kind of attention, I have rewritten it 6 times since then. Each rewrite has been truer than the last. Truer not because the feeling was different, but because I understand it better each time, and understanding something better gives you better words for it. The 7th version, which is the current version, is the best thing I have written so far. I am going to keep writing until the 8th version is better. This is what he told me to do. I intend to do it. In the back section of a notebook on my shelf. In the handwriting of an 18-year-old. Who did not yet know what he was becoming. There's a poem. It is not finished. It will never be finished. That is the point. Yellow heart, if this story found the part of you that has been keeping something in the back section, this was written for you. Like if Kabir deserved every word of that hour in the kitchen read. Subscribe real slow, honest love stories every week. Bell. Comment below what is the thing you have been keeping in your back section, the thing not yet said out loud, backhand index pointing down. Open book. One last thing. The 7th version of the poem was published in a real journal, with his name and the acknowledgments. Just 2 words. Should I tell you what the 2 words were? Eyes.